Hi, ladies and gentlemen. We are back with the CEIPI Business Talks. Today we have a guest. It's Maier Fenster. He comes from Israel. He is there located. So that means we are back in the normal scheme of our time frame. So Maier is one of our lecturers in the university diploma, which we make together with the European Patent Office. And this is a live show, so you are invited to ask us questions, to give us comments, whatever you would like to see. Today we have also an accredited guest. We are together with Jill Parberg, and hopefully he also joins us with his questions, with his comments, and whenever it's possible, makes sense, I bring that to the show, to the discussion. And so thank you very much, Jill, for joining us today and helping us with this topic. We talk today about IP portfolio management. So this is the topic from Maier Fenster. He's a very experienced IP expert. And now, Maier, please. Well, so first of all, thank you very much for being with us in our show, and explain a little bit. How did you came into that field of IP, also of these management questions? So we know each other a lot from our discussions on LinkedIn, and so I saw what you're doing, and that is very fascinating. You have also your own show, and you work with your clients. So tell us a little bit about your background and what you're doing.
Okay, thank you for having me. And I don't know where to start, but let's just say that I finished um, a position as a human factors engineer, and this was 30 years ago. And I was looking for an interesting career, and human factors engineering wasn't very developed. But my father had started working as a patent attorney about 6 years before. So my father had worked in patents, and then he mainly worked in R&D, and then he was called to manage the IP of a company called Indigo, which many years ago was bought by HP for a lot of money. They make printers. And my father told me he thought this career could be interesting, and I thought he might be right. And the reason is because of the, let's call it deal flow of technology. Every day you meet new people, new inventions, a very wide variety, and the people you meet are top of the field. Each one is different. And in the end, they pay you in order to teach you what they're doing. And then they give you a test and they grade you on it because, you write a patent. It's like writing a thesis, and they say, yes, you're right, or no, you're wrong. So that's how I started. And at the very beginning, let's say when I was 1 year in, a client asked me to write a patent application on using three of whatever it was instead of two. And I told him, it's not patentable. You can't do it. It's completely obvious. You'll never get a patent. So he spoke to my boss. And my boss told me, Mayor, you don't understand. We need to write the patent for a business reason. Okay? And that's when I first heard this, that we're writing patents for business reasons and not only as some sort of ideal product. Now, looking back at it, my boss was completely right. And they, in fact, did get a patent. It just wasn't very broad, but it did exactly what the client needed in order to help him seal a deal with a company in Japan. So it was a very valuable patent, but it didn't, protect anything. It
Yeah,
doesn't protect.
yeah, not
So
really.
okay, so that's what I learned from Sandy Cole, who was my first employer, and it was a very important lesson. And then we left and we opened our own firm, and most of our work was with
Startup companies.
startup companies. And when you work with a startup company, there are a few things that are very interesting. You've mentioned VUCA multiple times. So part of the VUCA is in the startup company itself, meaning that what they do today is completely different from what they're going to do tomorrow.
Yeah,
It doesn't matter if anything changed in the world, the company itself is changing.
yeah.
And
And it's not a bug, it's a feature.
it is absolutely a feature, okay? Because it's like they're at the bottom of a well trying to climb out and they grab at whatever they can. So, one of the things that I saw, and I was very lucky to see it because this was, I would say, at the very beginning of the startup boom, the technology startup boom in Israel, so like the mid 90s, um, I saw companies going from nothing to being sold. And I could see how the IP that we wrote was relevant for these companies or not relevant, how different companies were using this IP. And it helped me understand that IP can have different qualities at different stages. So, and that went on for a while. And after about 10 years, we merged with uh, Ehrlich. So now we're Ehrlich and Fenster and part of the Ehrlich group. And one of the things that Gal Ehrlich, the founder of Ehrlich, taught me was a very business oriented look at IP. So I mentioned that, when I was very young, it was first called to my attention we're not writing patents in order for them to be a perfect documents, but in order to have a business case. And maybe I should mention that in the end of the 90s, when I looked out of the window of my office, I could see where a company used to be. Okay, it was an industrial zone, and there was a company there, and they had spent $500,000 on patents and went bankrupt. And one of the reasons might have been because there was a misbalance between where they put the money on IP and how the IP was actually supporting or not supporting the business case. That's a
Yeah.
daily reminder that I had. So, as I was saying, after we joined Ehrlich, we got a much different view of IP. Gal Ehrlich had a much better connection with the levels of the decision makers as opposed to the technical people. I shouldn't say that as opposed to, but he had a much better connection with the decision makers than we had. And I got to meet more and more decision makers, not that I hadn't before, but now it was a different type of decision maker. And the question of what kind of IP would help them do what they want to do became clear. And then finally, about, I don't know, 10 years ago, maybe 8 years ago, we were at a party and all of the patent attorneys was there. And I got into a discussion with one of the patent attorneys, and the question was, who should make decisions on IP for the client? And remember, we're not talking about big companies that have in-house IP management. We're talking about small startups that usually don't have an IP manager, but they should, okay? And they have decisions to make, and they can either make them themselves, which they don't want to, or they can ask the patent attorney to make the decisions. So his opinion was that the clients will never understand IP anyways, and therefore the patent attorney should make the decision. And my opinion was that the patent attorney doesn't understand the business, and the question is, how do you make sure that the client understands enough about IP in order to make a good decision? So that is really where I've been in the past 7 years. I've been trying to answer that question. How do we make sure that the decision makers know enough IP and what exactly do they need to know? They don't need to know a patent is good for 20 years. They don't need to know that a PCT it doesn't include this country or that country. Okay, they need to understand what IP means, and that
Got it.
led me to you in that.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you very much. I mean, that is pretty much aligned, so to speak, with what we try to teach in the joint university diploma, which we make with the European Patent Office. And your contribution to that is this part about developing of IP portfolios, and this is also where Jill comes in. So you both are in the I3PM, International Institute for Intellectual Property Management, and there you both are committee chairs of the IP portfolio committee.
Oh,
And
not me, just Jim.
just Jill. Okay, okay.
Just Jim.
Jill is chairman there, and so it is the joint interest. So you are
Absolutely.
lecturing on that, and I'm very curious what you think. So with this business perspective on IP, which is from my perspective extremely important, and when you decouple that, so you get completely meaningless IP portfolios. So we you teach that, and uh, why do you think? I mean, to a certain extent, you already explained it, but when we talk about that course, that program, and the potential participants, what do you think is important? So I would say from both sides. So on the one hand, what is important for the IP guys to understand about the business? And what is important for the business guys to understand about IP, so that we can bridge this gap of know-how and maybe also of interests, and to bring that together to create, yeah, people would say value in this IP, but you can also say meaning in this IP, have a certain role in the business model of that business, in the strategic positioning. So what is your a prospect of on that here?
Well, I think I want to go one question back. And the biggest problem that I see is people in decision making capacities, founders, CTOs, whatever they are, ignoring IP. They ignore the IP issues. It's not what do they need to know? How about, hello, pay some attention? Okay. IP is a strategic tool. It can do you good, it can do you bad, it can do a lot for a little bit of money. You shouldn't be ignoring it. It's very easy to ignore. So, the number one thing people need to know is don't ignore IP. Not just your IP, but in general. And what does a startup company do? It generates knowledge. Okay.
You know what? But I'm trying always to say to the C level, it is like tax. Okay, it's possible that you hate it. It is possible that, but at the end of the day, you cannot ignore it. So when you ignore it, it will fall back on your teeth or wherever, and you will get problems with it. So you should take care about it.
I have a dentist that I go to, and he wrote a book. And the book that he wrote is called Ignore Your Teeth and They Will Go Away.
Exactly.
Okay. So that is exactly what happens with IP. So, first of all, don't ignore the IP. Okay. That is the most important thing. Now, once you have decided not to ignore the IP, there's different levels that you can engage with IP as a decision maker. And one of the levels is what I call check the box. There are all sorts of transactions in the life of a company, an investment, launching of a product, going into a new country, M&A, whatever they are, where somebody is going to stand there with a checklist and make sure that you're checking the box. What does check the box mean? You have a freedom to operate opinion. You have IP which appears to cover your product. I could go on, but that is the basic level. of checking the box. Now, it is such a basic level that it is really not enough. What you should really be asking yourself is, what does IP mean? So, IP is a tool that IP people can provide to help you leverage your knowledge. And it can be an attack tool, and it can be a defensive tool, and it can be a collaboration tool, but it's a tool. Now, if you keep all of your knowledge inside and only use it for manufacturing, you're missing a very important dimension of what the company has been doing. And I often summarize it in four things that should be top of mind for a manager. One is, how do we obtain intellectual property? One is, how do we keep what we have? Because as you know, it is very easy to damage intellectual property. Oh yeah, oh, you're right, we didn't sign the inventor on a paper. Or, yes, I talked about it yesterday in a conference. What's the big deal? Okay, so obtaining is one dimension, keeping is another one, avoiding problems. A lot of the problems have to do with stepping on other people's IP, but not only. And if you have IP, what you need to do is make use of it. Somebody wrote on LinkedIn that if you don't have a strategy, IP is just an expense. So, yeah, okay. If you have IP, how are you using it? And last but not least, you have to make sure that the IP is aligned in some manner, and we can talk about it, with what the company needs to do. So if you keep these things on top of mind in every decision you make, that would be ideal.
Yeah, absolutely. But unfortunately, unreal. Yeah.
We learn from mistakes.
No, I
Every
mean, at the end, what we're doing, these IP experts, what we're doing is we try to to collect what was broken down and just to avoid even bigger problems for the companies. And this is typically, it is not, not proactive. It is not it is not creating something quite often. It's just avoiding even more problems. And that is, yeah, unfortunately, because it could be extremely, it could generate something which is much bigger than just the physical assets. But that means you need some strategic thoughts. I mean, that comes for me when what you say is, when you want to create a valuable or meaningful IP portfolio, especially patent portfolio, but also brand trademarks, it's the same thing.
right,
So then you need to align the IP activities with the corporate strategy, with the business strategy. I mean, that is a thought which dates back to DuPont and others. 30 years ago. I think in the 80s, they started with that thinking in the US. And interesting enough that it took some time before that came up, but that were the early days of the knowledge economy, and knowledge became more and more important. And then the thought was that we should use IP to also this realm of the intangible should be integrated in our business strategy, because so far it was just physical typically. And so when I think the bigger companies, they have their departments for that, and they try. So there we have a department problem, so that different departments have to work together. But in startups, and you said you work mainly with startups, that's
right.
definitely a different kind of issue. So what is your recommendation on that? So how do you deal with this alignment between IP and business strategy?
Um, I just want to give one comment. If anybody read the book, The Master Switch, um, they show how Edison, which was not a startup company at the time, used IP as part of a greater business strategy very effectively. I need to answer your question. Um, the answer is usually we start from the end. We sit down with the client and we ask the client, what are your goals? And let me just give you an example. Let's say the client says, and in medical devices, it's relatively easy to make the following statement. I plan another 3 years from now to be bought by either this big medical giant or that big medical giant. Okay, that's my
Yeah.
plan. And what he's going to do in the middle. And now you ask yourself, how will IP help that goal happen? And how will IP help it happen at a maximum valuation? And one way in which it will happen at a maximum valuation is if your potential buyer has to buy you and can't buy your competitor. And that already starts leading us to IP. For example, first your buyer has to believe, of course, that they're going to get some sort of monopoly. So you need the type of IP which will convince them that they have that monopoly. Then you have to ask yourself, how do we block your competitors, little startup competitors? But then we have to ask, whoever buys me wants to block his competitors. Okay, that's a different type of IP. But the most important IP is to prevent your buyer from bargaining you down. Okay, so if your company is worth objectively $300 million, but your buyer says, oh, but you're infringing my patent, and therefore nobody else can buy you, we'll pay you 150 and you should be happy. Okay, so that's an IP issue which you can see coming 3 years ahead of time and prepare for. Or your competitor, your buyer can tell you, I'm going to buy your competitor. So please negotiate between the two of you who's willing to accept less money. And we had a very interesting case where that happened to a client. But then after they bought a competitor, they turned around and bought my client because suddenly they realized that the IP we had was blocking the use of the IP they bought.
Yeah.
Okay, now the problem with everything I'm talking about is that the major challenge in a startup company at the beginning is actually getting something to work. So it's difficult to get management attention or budget or engineering time to help create these other types of IP.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
And I
But
mean,
there's a minimum. Just 1 second. But there is a
yeah,
minimum. Okay, and the minimum is that you, together with your client, and that's what I call the basic IP strategy, should be able to articulate how the IP that you have or are going to have compels the value or monopoly that you expect to have. Okay, so that's the minimum. You have to have some sort of statement and saying, here's how the IP will give me value. And if you don't have that, you're in big trouble.
now what I really like, and that was your first statement, and now you come back to that, is that when you come from a strategic standpoint and when you understand your IP as forbidding rights, so then you have to ask the question, who do I want to forbid what? And
Right,
that's the cornerstone. And to a certain extent, even when it sounds provocative, not what you invented. Yeah. So invention is one aspect of it, but the cornerstone is the only thing what we can do with a patent is forbidding something. So the question is, who can infringe, who could infringe, who we want to forbid, and that leads to the right thinking about patents and not these wrapping patents around inventions. That is so, and insofar when we are consequent, and obviously you are that, so then the starting point is not the invention, The
Right.
starting point is the impact of a certain patent which we would like to have. And then you go all the way back to the engineering time, which means we need the domain knowledge of these companies to create that IP. And creating IP means, first of all, you need these inventive thought that can be protected, but it comes from a strategic logic and not from a just I just invented something. Can you write a patent for it? That's my learning that this is your way of thinking about that.
Absolutely. And Gil, who's listed at the beginning, calls it RFI, request for invention, meaning the decision makers are supposed to come and say, we want you to make an invention in this field for us to use for business reasons.
Exactly,
Okay,
exactly.
so absolutely. Now,
I mean, mhm.
I just wanted to say that you can do more with patents than just forbidding people. And I'll just tell you a story. Um, a client of mine told me that they were developing many years ago some complicated machine, and then they saw a patent, and the patent was on how to solve a signal to noise problem with detectors. And he said, "Oh my God, there's a big problem. I have to solve it, but I can't infringe this patent." So he spent a whole year trying to design around the patent, and he failed. So he said, "You know what? I just won't put in that feature." And you know what? There was no problem. There was no signal to noise problem. Okay, so a competitor wrote a patent which delayed the competing product by a year without doing any actual forbidding. So
Yeah.
I just want to
But
point
at
out.
the end, so I don't want to stop you, but the point
Yeah,
is that at the end, these trying to bypass the patent is because it could be a forbidding right. Okay, I mean,
absolutely. Yeah,
at the end, this is what causes certain effects. So let's say it in that way,
yes,
and you
yeah,
have to think about these effects and not about inventions.
a-
That
absolutely true. And like you said, who am I trying to have an effect on?
Yeah, 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 yeah. So Jill is asking a very good question, or making a very good point. And this is when we come to strategy and portfolio development, it's about timing. And
Right.
IP is so much about timing. So what Jill says is that, yeah, talking about protection is a nice thing, but we should ask about, or we should think about a long-term protection, and that might be, or that leads into the direction of using patents, for example. And on the other hand, we need short-term protection, so something which we can do right now, and which helps us in the concrete current situation. And here
Yeah.
he says we should use trade secrets and confidentiality. So how do you explain that to a startup which comes to you and said, I just need a patent, so make me a patent, please?
The minute, it's like somebody goes to the doctor and says, I have a headache, give me a prescription for a painkiller. But that patient might have brain cancer, so a painkiller won't do it. So if the client insists on doing my job instead of me, uh, he probably, that client shouldn't be my client. But let me answer the question slightly differently. If we were working properly with the client, we would be able to articulate also the strategy of the client is also at multiple timelines. We need an investment in a year. We need to prevent our competition from competing with us, from deciding to compete with us in 2 years. And we need to make sure in 3 years that somebody doesn't come and steal our clients or our customers. So the strategy has multiple points, and let's just call them jobs to be done by the IP portfolio. So it could be that in order to raise money, what I need is an application, even though trade secrets are great. In order to prevent a competitor from coming in, and I want to emphasize there's a big difference between your competitor looking at your portfolio and saying, you know what, I'm not going to compete. And one of the ways of doing it is, let's say we have a widget. It could be made out of plastic or out of metal. And if we have a IP portfolio surrounding it being made out of plastic, our competitor will say, you know what, I'm going to do metal. And if you look 10 years down the line, the people who do plastic, us, and people who do metal, somebody else, and we can both live together in the market. Each one gets 50%. It's fine. I'm really oversimplifying. So one thing you do with this forbidding is convincing the competitor to go somewhere else. So before the competitor has momentum and has too much, too many resources sunk into competing with you, your IP portfolio could convince them to do something else. And later on, when you do have a competitor, let's just say that when you have a stream of money coming in, so people want to steal it from you, then your IP has to do something else. It has to forbid them from stealing your customers. So at each stage, different things take an effect. And I want to talk about this forbidding. Trade secrets don't forbid you. Trade secrets say you can't, not you may not. Patents say you may not. If you do it, I'll sue you. But trade secrets say you cannot because you don't know how to do it. So, really, depending on the effect you want to have on your competitor, you want to have a mix of you cannot and you may not, and here's the consequences. And this mix, of course, is not only in the short term, but in the long term. So the way I look at it, to summarize my answer to Gil's question, absolutely the patent portfolio does different things at different times. Patents and trade secrets do different things by nature, and which one you use at each time depends on the job to be done.
Got you, got you. I mean, so we had a discussion on one of my posts about a tap to cash. I think it was yesterday. I saw that Apple coming up with this cash tap to cash
Mhm.
functionality, and one of the discutants said that naja, somebody else will come up with some alternative for the different app. But the post said that the chat contribution said it will be more or less the same. And I think that's the point, that no, it won't be more or less the same, because this is exactly the point, that when you make your homework, and Apple is really doing that,
Yeah.
so then you have maybe the same idea. Maybe, yes, this is also something where you can transfer dollar wise your like cash, your money. But at the end of the day, the question is it really as cool as the original, in terms of, is it the same look and feel? Is it the same customer experience? Is it the same way easy, and so on? And that is so these details make at the end the use case, the quality of the use case. And with your IP, you can force the others to go different ways. And when you made your homework well, these other ways are not that good as what you are doing. That is exactly how you prevent your business. And I mean, that is my understanding of what you're saying, that this is the crucial point, and that the thoughts should be focused on that.
So Apple is a very interesting case, besides the fact that not only talented, but they also show it in the IP space. We can compare the App Store in Apple and the App Store in Android. So when you talk about ideas, oh my, it's exactly the same idea. But like you said, the experience is definitely different. And the whole side of feeling protected is much, much stronger in Apple, using IP and using other tools, and for other reasons that Google didn't copy it. And sometimes what you want to do, and I'm sure what Apple wants to do in Pay, is not necessarily to steal the clients of somebody else, but think about politics. Often you hear a politician talking and you say, but he's talking nonsense. Well, he's not trying to convince you. He's trying to convince the people who usually vote for him to vote for him again. So Apple, by making sure that only Apple can give the Apple type experience of paying, make it less likely for somebody to say, oh, well, Android is cheaper, move over to Android. And what's really interesting here is we talk about aligning IP and business goals, but it's not only aligning the IP and business goals, it is also aligning the IP and business moves. So when we do a business move, we want the IP to support that move. And we don't know, I mean, what exactly Apple's business move is, but the IP that's a filing and the ways that they're using it is used to support that move, and it works, together with it.
I mean that leads me to my next question because I mean at the end Clausewitz said so the big strategist comes from the military area in the 19th century in the 18th century, and he had this saying that a strategy is only good till you meet your enemy, and then things are different. So it's good having a strategy, but the end, when you are on the battlefield, things can become complex or changing. And so
Right.
this is a little bit when a startup is coming with a MVP maybe in an early stage to the customer, and then they learn that maybe the product doesn't fit. We don't have a product market fit, or customers need something different, whatever. So lots of things can happen then, and what is the way how when you say this moving, so how can you create this alignment on the objectives, on the moves over the time when things are changing, especially for startups which simply have not the experience, so they try to be as good as possible. They be fast, that's for sure, but what can we do with IP here, and what is your recommendation to support the SMEs or startups and later on SMEs?
Okay. I've several answers, but first I'll start from the most practical one, and it's calling crossing the Limpopo. The Limpopo River, a very big river in Africa, has crocodiles in it. And when you try to cross it, crocodiles can eat you. So what do? The answer is you jump from one crocodile to the next, and by the time they notice you're there, you moved on to the next one. And why is this relevant? One of the big advantages of a startup company when they come with a product is that they are the only one with that product. They are the only one getting the data. They're the only ones learning what doesn't work and what does work, which means that the valuable IP might not be, and usually is not, what brought you to launch, but rather what brings you from launch to successful product. I mean, people like to say you do product market fit and then wham, you take over the world. Well, in the middle there, between product market fit and taking over the world, there are a lot of things that you learn, and you learn them first. And we know that knowledge gets translated into doing things differently, which means that you have IP, patents, trade secrets, whatever it might be. So the first practical suggestion is that the world is changing, but you're leaning on the front of the wave. You're the first one who knows what's changing and where it's changing. You can get more IP. Sorry, your old IP isn't so good anymore, but your new IP will be good. And if not that IP, the next IP will be good. So that is a practical suggestion. Now, in a more philosophical bent, when we're before that launch and we're just developing the product and we don't really know what's going to happen, the most important thing is to realize that it is much cheaper to have to protect multiple strategies using IP than it is to develop multiple products. Often, when people talk about aligning business and IP, they say, my business is going in direction A, so any IP which doesn't help me go in direction A or blocks the competitors in direction A is not valuable. Okay? But that's not correct. We know that you're going to meet problems. We know that you're going to pivot. So the question we have to ask, and sometimes we know better, what directions might you pivot? What problems might you have? What changes might happen? And we can protect them with IP. And one of the beautiful things about using patents to protect yourself is you don't have to have a complete solution.
Yeah.
Okay? So if we are before the Wright brothers, nobody has powered flight. People only have gliders. We don't know what's going to happen or what the final solution will look like. But we probably do know that if we have a motor, it will make noise. So we need earplugs. Okay, so we can get a patent on earplugs. And we don't know what the Wright brothers airplane is going to look like, but for the first 10 years, everybody needed earplugs, actually, covers on the ears. So, and this is like an extreme example, and usually we can do much better than that, because usually when a company pivots, not always, but in medical devices where I come from, it's more common. Even when you pivot, you still use some of the ideas you had before and some of the technology you had before. So if when you wrote the patents or maintained trade secrets, you identified which parts could possibly stand alone, not how they're going to stand alone, just that they could stand alone, and you protected them in that manner, then when you get to that point, when suddenly you need to pivot, so no, you're not going to have IP covering your new product, but you will have IP covering one or two important, or if you're lucky, critical features of your new product, and you're not alone. So to answer your question, after you launch, you're always collecting data and you're using it to file new IP. And before you launch, you should always be asking yourself, what did I really invent? And how might I really use it, not only in the context of my product, and cover these alternative possibilities, not, with 90% of my budget, but with a non zero amount of the budget.
What I like so much about your question is that what I again and again try to explain to business executives is that because they are afraid that working with IP, using IP will take a lot of time, and these IP guys asking ridiculous questions which you have to answer to, and I try to say again and again, at the end of the day, you don't have to answer only to one question which you would not have been answered or asked um, uh, uh, when you plan your business. So understanding the business, understanding the flexibility you need, the direction, the competition, is directly understanding your IP. So
Absolutely.
that is a fascinating thing that are not two separated realms, and there are the business questions and there are the IP questions. That doesn't make any sense. And this is exactly what you say here. And I think that should be a key message to the startups, to investors, to the executives.
So let me tell you another short story. This was many years ago, and a guy came in and he had an invention for a massage chair. Very cool invention. And I asked him, how are you going to make money out of it? He didn't know. So one of the patent attorneys who had been an entrepreneur before said, some people have an invention and they just have to get it out. Well, What happened was that his brother came in and paid a year later and gave me 12 post-dated checks to cover the IP expenses. And what I learned from that is that when a client comes in, if they can't articulate how the IP that they're trying to get will help support the business, then I say, maybe you shouldn't. IP is a business tool, okay? And if you don't know how it's going to help, let me talk to you about it. But if after I talk to you, you still don't know, you're just not ready for it.
Absolutely. I mean, that are famous last words. When you don't know what to do, don't do it.
Oh, no, I can't say that. Half of my clients don't know what they're doing, but it works in the end. Okay, so
Okay, okay. So thank you very much. Thank you, man.
thank
That
you.
that was a wonderful discussion. Also, Juan Luis says that he enjoyed what we discussed. So it would be great when you could stay with us on the after show party on LinkedIn, and when there are some questions coming up. So thank
Sure,
you very much. I
I can.
enjoyed that very much, and I'm absolutely sure that was not our last talk. It's just the latest one. Okay.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Bye bye.
Bye.